when are markets successful, right? And the flip side of it is, well, when markets fail. Today, we're going to focus on two reasons when market fails. One is externalities, and we're going to talk about what they are, and the other is public goods. Okay? Right, so just a refresh your memory from first year economic course. We have demand and supply. Right? So this is price, this is quantity on whatever market you can think about, commodities, ice cream, chocolate, iPhone, and so on. We have downward sloping demand curve. The higher is the price. There's fewer demands there. There's upward sloping supply curve. The higher is the price, more manufacturer, more retailer, more suppliers is willing to supply the products, the goods or services. Okay. One way to think about it is, well, it doesn't have to be this, but one way I think conceptually is kind of a convenient thing about it is there are many, many suppliers. Each of them can supply 1 unit of the goods in the market, but they have different costs. Okay, so so when the price is low, let's say here, let's say there's only one supplier who is willing to supply. But when the price is high, let's say here, many of them are happy to supply the unit, and therefore the supply is high. Okay. Similarly, we can do that we can think about it for demand. There are many, many consumers. Each of them only demand at most 1 unit of the goods. And so when the price is high, there's only one person is willing to pay that much for that goods. And when the demand is, so when the price is low, many people are happy to buy it. So the demand is high. And then if we connect all these dots, we have a demand curve. And similarly, if we connect all these blue dots, we have a supply curve. Okay? So what happens if the price is, say, here? Now, the supply is here, let's say 4. Right? But if we look at the demand curve, many people are happy to buy it if the price is 4. So let's say the demand is 10. Okay, so demand is greater than supply. There's a shortage, and the market adjusts upwards in price, and so price goes up, and more people are going to supply things, and more people, and fewer people have demands. Right? So to deal with this shortage, it might take time, but that's the market dynamic. Okay, so until they adjust to this equilibrium point, where it equates demand and supply, it will keep going. And so we have this market equilibrium with that price, let's call them P star, and that quantity being produced and consumed, let's call them Q star. So that's the market equilibrium. Okay? In a perfectly competitive markets, right, where no individual producer or suppliers have the power to set the price. Okay? So, but then that's just equilibrium, right? And why would it could be good, it could be bad. Okay? It turned out that there's some nice property about that equilibrium. Right? What would that be? Well, it turned out that in that equilibrium, the market is efficient. And there's a kind of a first welfare theorem in economics say, well, that's efficient outcome. Right? Now, what I omitted is a number of assumptions. Okay, so when you see this graph, actually, in the title, we have highlighted that there's perfect competitions. Right? So think about no individual consumer or producer is able to have market power. They can take the prices given. They just look at the market and say, oh, that's the price. That's whether I can produce or not, or whether I can buy or not. Right? So perfect competitions. The other thing is we're talking about a private goods, a goods that consumed by people and it only affect them. The opposite of that private goods is what we call public good, and we're going to talk about it later on. There's no what we call externality. So the productions and the consumptions only affect the producer and the consumer. It doesn't affect other people, okay? And so in that case, the market is efficient. It maximizes the surplus. Okay, why? Well, if you think about it, let's say the price is not P star, it's not equilibrium price. Let's say the price is here, P0, right? Here, right, there's a suppliers is willing to supply the last units at that price. And if it go a little bit higher, there's another supplier is willing to produce an extra units, and so there's greater supply. And so the cost for the extra supplies, and we'll call it marginal cost, is around here, P0. But you think about it, there's many individual, let's say individual here, the willingness to pay for that unit, it's much higher than P0. Actually, it's closer to here, right? So there's a mutually beneficial trade such that if the price is a little bit higher, right, that person is still happy to pay for that, and because the price is higher than, sorry, the price is much lower than his or her willingness to pay for it, right, or the valuation of that units, they are happy about it. Right? That person is happy about it. At the same time, that individual, as long as we're talking about a price somewhere in between, is higher than the supplier's willingness to supply. Okay, so so there's a surplus, right? If it only costs me $10, and you're willing to pay me to produce, you're willing to pay me $12. I'm gaining $2, right? So as long as we are not at this equilibrium price and quantity, right, there's always a gap, okay, between the consumer's marginal willingness to pay and the marginal cost for the extra units from the suppliers, okay? And this is like what happens when the price is below this equilibrium price. If it's here on the other side, the flip side happens. Right? For that extra unit, let's say it costs like $15 to produce that last unit, but here the consumer only value that last unit, right, by let's say $5. And so it costs more to produce that last unit than the last consumer's valuation of that unit. So in that, the society is not like being efficient. Okay, so it's what kind of wasting $10 just for that last unit. So it cover for socially optimal level of productions, the production level should be lower, okay? And then until you are at this point, we don't maximize surplus. So for that, for private goods, where only people affected by it is the producer and the consumer, market equilibrium happens to be where surplus are maximized, right? The market is being efficient, right? Now, in that market, we're talking about private good. There's no information asymmetry we talk about, which could cause the market to fail. Right? And importantly, there are no externalities. What are externalities? A definition of externality, right, is, well, it happens whenever the actions of one party directly affects the welfare of another party. But the first party neither bear the cost or receive the benefit of doing so. Okay, so directly means that the first party's action affect the market. It affects other people not through the market price. Right? So if you go to eBay and bid for, let's say, Taylor Swift's tickets, and that's the last ticket, if you win, the other person loses it, that's not externality, right? Because it happens through the market price. And externality could arise because of either consumptions or productions or both, right? And externality could be negative, such as air pollution, like when people are traveling by cars, it imposes several kinds of negative externality on others by, say, adding to the traffic congestions and increase the traveling time and delays of others. Okay? So people's consumption of traveling service, either public transportation or driving a car, taking an Uber, taxi, and so on. Right? The consumer is whoever taking the transportation. The producer is the driver, TransLink, Uber, or Uber driver. But because the fact that they use the, here is driving by car, so there's no TransLink. What they do, they consume the transportation service. Their consumptions affect other people's traveling time by adding to the traffic congestions. And so they have negative externality, and that externality manifests itself as like a tiny bit more traffic congestions. It could also increase the risk of hitting someone else, like accident happens. So you may not see it all the time, but statistically, the more you drive, the more likely you got into accidents, and that risk is there. It could contribute to air pollution, particularly if you're driving a car powered by internal combustion engines. It emits some greenhouse gases, it emits some fine particles. And in other incidents, if people use fossil fuel to produce or do other things, it kind of imposes negative externality on everyone on the planet by contributing to global warming as well. Okay, it might be tiny, but it's there. And once you add them up, they could be big. Okay, so those are examples of negative externality. You can think about example of positive externality, and even before the pandemic, this is a well-known example: vaccinations and other preventive measures like wearing a mask against contagious disease. Those behavior or consumptions of vaccines and masks, the usage of masks, they have positive externality because they reduce the risk of transmitting disease to others. Okay, and so without considering all this externality, people may overconsume or overproduce using polluting techniques. And so, for example, in China, you can see the sky. Maybe some days only on the cover night screen. You can see the blue only on the night screen in Beijing, for example. or sunsets on a screen. And this is the thing that happens quite often in a lot of developing countries, China, India, and historically London and LA and so on. And later today, we're going to see a few presentations on how people come and measure all those externalities and the consequence of this market failure where something got overproduced and affect the well-being of others. Okay, so how to deal with all these externality, the market failure, because in the markets, the producer might only consider their own benefits and costs, and therefore they don't consider the externality they impose on others. Another way to say it is they don't internalize all these externalities. How to solve it? There's one well-known theorem which is called Coase theorem because it's due to Ronald Coase, and therefore this is often known as the Coasean solutions. Well, the theorem would say, well, if the property rights are clearly assided, parties could just bargain to internalize all costs and benefit and achieve the social optimum in terms of efficiency. And what they say is for efficiency, it does not matter which side the rise is given. Okay? It works for both negative externality as well as positive externality. So here's one example to see how the Coasean bargaining work. Suppose a textile factory could produce a tons of fabric to gain $200 and pollute the river next to it. So the pollution generates externality, and how it affects others, in this case the other being the fishermen fishing in this river. If it's an unpolluted river, the fisherman can gain like $500, but only $200 in a polluted river. Okay? So if you think about it, if there's no fabric and no pollution, altogether the profit from the river is $500 generated by the fishermen. But if there's production of the fabric and there's pollutions, the social surplus is $400. The factory got $200, the fisherman got $200. So socially optimal things to do here is there's no fabric productions and no pollution. But if the rights to use the river is unclear, so basically anyone can use it, or no one's preventing from using it, or for other reasons there's no bargaining, then the textile factory would just ignore the externality of its productions. And it will produce, it will pollute, and they got 200, and the fishermen got 200. Okay? Now, suppose the fisherman has the right to use the river, right? So in that case, the fisherman would say, no fabric productions and no pollution. And then we'll have the social optimal outcome, and that's $500 for the fisherman to fish in an unpolluted river. But suppose the factory has the right to use the river. Okay? Well, as long as it's clear, everyone knows about it and they can bargain about it, the fisherman can bargain with the factory to pay somewhere between $200 and $300 to not produce and not pollute the river. Right? So the factory, if they produce, they only got 200. So any number above 200, they're happy about it. Right? They would, okay, we accept it, we don't produce anything. And the fishermen, right, unpolluted river generate $500. Any number between 200 and 300 that you pay to the factory owner, let's say 250, right, they will still got 250. And that's greater than 200. Right? As long as the payment is less than $300, the fisherman will still get more or better outcome by just paying something to the paying the amount to the factory and tell them, look, don't pollute the river, I'm just going to compensate you for your loss of revenue. And the factory were happy to accept it. And so still, in this case, yes, fishermen would earn less. Factory would earn a little bit more. But we still have this socially optimal outcome, which is no pollutions, no fabric productions, and fishermen got to fish in an unpolluted river. Okay, so that's, as far as we are concerned, if we only talk about social optimal and we don't talk about, if we don't consider equity, then the social optimal outcome is achieved. Now, the co-CEO will say, for efficiency, it really doesn't matter who got the property rights. It might affect the distribution of this surplus, but for equity, it doesn't really matter. The optimal, the efficient outcome would happen as long as the property rights are clear and people can bargain. Okay? So that solves the problem of externality in this example. But in many situations, there's a lot of limitations of quotient bargaining. One, the cost of bargaining could be just too high, right? And if the cost is way higher than the potential benefits, there's no point to bargain if that's the case. Okay, so think about legal fees, times, and sometimes it could be just non-financial costs. People might get emotional and this, well, how come you cover not polluting, just jeopardizing my cover livelihoods, right? The other kind of barrier to this quotient solution is the harmed party may not be able to identify who caused the damage. Think about there's 10 fabric factory there. Not all of them are polluting. Maybe one of them polluting, but you don't know which one. In that case, it's which one to bargain, and nobody would say, "Oh, I'm the one who bargained it. I'm the one who polluted and give me trouble." Right? And sometimes if we're talking about policy externality, if I'm clear who is the benefited party, then the quotient solution may not work as well. Who are you going to bargain with to kind of share some of this positive externality? If there are too many parties are involved, and there's a problem of coordinations, people may have incentive to free rides in this bargaining process. Global warming is one example. Everyone on the Earth are affected by it, although not to the same degree. It's hard to just gather all these people to bargain solutions, and even then, there's a problem of a commitment issue where we sort of talk about last year. Even if they reach a solution, and what happens if someday people say, "Oh, I'm good, I'll change my mind." Right? There are other private solutions as well. So, for example, like the factory and the fishermen, they could form corporations. And so since now they're in one corporation, they could just, in a way, internalize what the costs and benefits and say, okay, this is the most profitable thing to do, let's just fish and don't produce. And even when the property rights legally are not well defined, sometimes social convention norm emerge that implicitly assign property rights. It's less expensive, but it could take time, and social norm may not be that clear sometimes, and that could be a barrier to reach this quotient solution as well. The other one is, well, there could be a class actions lawsuit, particularly in common law country, such as in Australia and US, where a large group of harmed individuals can collectively represented by one or few members of the group or lawyers, and they could suit the party creating the harms. And the threat of class action lawsuit may help coordinate the problem and help with mitigating this free riding problem, but not necessarily all. And when we think about it as a private solution, but you still have the backing of the states, the governments, a legal system, to even if you don't use it, even if the threat is enough, in the background you have to have this backing of the judicial system, so that this class action lawsuit may work. Okay, so it's not entirely a private solution. And in many places, even if they have this kind of lawsuit is feasible, the legal system may not work as well. It may take ages. It costs a lot, and so it may be hard to kind of work these things out in those settings. Right? Here's one example where there's some policy externality, and there's kind of a clever way to at least mitigate it. So a few years ago, I went to Korea to give a seminar. And after the seminar, I just went to sightseeing in Seoul. So I went to this Korean palace, actually called Cheongdakong. Here it's Asian palace, not really Asian, but historical, interesting place. And a lot of people are wearing these traditional Korean dresses called hanbok, like this dress. And it's kind of interesting. And the people inside the palace wearing it as well. Not all of them, like people, some people just, they don't wear it. So one can think about that as other people wearing it. It could create a positive externality on to other tourists. Like other tourist experience may be enhanced by this visual of tourists wearing hanbok, because that's where Korean people used to wear in this kind of back in the day when the palace was occupied by either the king or their family in those palaces. So tourists on this traditional dress hanging out around the palace could consider positive externality to other tourists, and to encourage, but this kind of, it has a cost, which is inconvenient, may not be as comfortable as modern dress. So people got some benefit from it, and they wait for the cost. It costs money to buy it, rent it. And so if the benefit outweigh the cost, they would do it, but that's only considered a private benefit cost, right? And they don't consider like the benefit to other people. So there could be under provisions compared to a socially optimal level of people wearing it. So the governments, or at least those who administrating the palace, was, okay, let's encourage this kind of visual service by waiving the admission fee for the visitor wearing hanbok. Now there's additional benefits of wearing this traditional dress, and people might be more inclined to wear it and get us closer to this socially optimal level of people wearing traditional Korean dresses. Okay, so that was another example where you correct the market failure of under provisions of people wearing hanboks by subsidizing it. Subsidy is another thing about it, is negative taxes. And so this solution is oftentimes called a Pingulian solution because it's named after economist Pingu. So one could correct the markets by giving it, adjusting the incentive by imposing a tax and subsidy. And the different way to do it, one is just particular car tax or subsidy. So In that case, the subsidy is just emission fee, right? In a handbook example. For negative externality for pollution on gas, generated by burning gas and fossil fuel, there could be a tax on those fuel, exercise tax that make it a bit more expensive to use those fossil fuel. But one can also tax it or subsidize using other means as well. It's not necessarily clear as the traditional tax that we see, things like emission fees. Still, they make it more expensive to produce certain kind of things if they generate emissions, but they are taxing the emission itself rather than the goods. And there's a more use more markets mechanism, which is cap the emissions, but allow people to trade. If you want to produce generate more emissions, you have to buy a permit from other people. And if you don't reach that quota, you can sell the permits. And that allows some pricing in terms of introduce a market incentive to price this externality. And that's solving this market failure through corrective taxes and subsidy. The other one is more sort of simple in a way that you just say, oh, you can't do it. So that's called command and control. And so basically, so you can't burn, you can't pollute, you can't build a factory next to a river. And those measures cover it's similar in a way, in a sense that you just tell them people what you can do, you cannot do. It may not be as efficient, but in all settings, things that I'll talk about, if government have no kind of sophisticated bureaucracy to enforce cap and trade, for example, then they might need to resort to command and control to deal with the market failure. Right, so how will it work? The correct tax or subsidy. So we call that surpluses are maximized in the market equilibrium for private goods because the marginal cost, the cost of producing that extra units, is equal to the marginal benefits for consumer getting that extra units. So they are equal. Otherwise, we are either here, 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 or here. There's a scope to change things in order to get to a better situation. So here, the marginal benefits would be greater than the marginal cost. So there should be more being produced, more goods or services being produced, because in the society, the extra units get more benefit than the cost. And the flip side, the marginal cost is higher than the marginal benefits if we are here. So less should be produced. So that last unit is not socially beneficial. And so at the optimal, we must have this, the marginal cost equal to marginal benefit, and that's where supply meets demand. In the absence of externality, if we're just talking about ice cream, iPhone, things that doesn't generate externality, so this private marginal cost is going to be equal to the social marginal cost because other people are not affected by it. And the private marginal benefit is going to be equal to the social marginal benefits. And so without externalities, the market equilibrium also gives us the social marginal cost and being equal to the social marginal benefits. And that is the optimal outcome for the same logic that in this case, the market equilibrium gives you a socially optimal outcome. But with externality, that equivalence no longer holds. if you generate pollutions, the private marginal cost is going to be greater than the social marginal cost, right? Because somebody got harmed, and that's costly, right? And if it's positive externality, it could be that, well, if the consumption of that goods generate positive externality for other vaccine, for example, the private benefit may also be smaller than the social benefit, marginal benefit, okay? And so, how to deal with it, right? The market now, because the market equilibrium, if you left the market to just do things, let the price to guide the productions and consumptions and the quantity and price and output in this level, in this market, it will reach this market equilibrium. But there, the social marginal cost is not equal to social marginal benefit. We're not maximizing surplus. Well, in order to restore that efficiency, right, we could impose a subsidy if we're talking about positive externality. Okay, so if it benefits other people outside of these markets, the social marginal cost, right, is lower, and so it's lower than the private marginal cost. And so we could, okay, let's push down the private marginal cost a little bit by subsidizing the productions, and so that when individual face this private marginal cost being equal to social marginal cost, whenever market equilibrium you have after this subsidy, we'll get back to this social marginal cost equal to social marginal benefits. And similarly, for negative production externality, we impose a tax, right? So it make it, because these government interventions to corrective tax and subsidy is more costly for the producer to produce. And if you set it right, so that the private marginal cost is equal to social marginal cost, again, you get back to the social optimal, right? The social efficiency. So here's one example. Let's say we have a demand curve given by this equation. So it's linear, it's downward sloping, so it just makes things easy. And even makes things easier for the supply side, let's call the marginal cost being constant. Okay? So there's an infinite amount of producer, they're happy to produce just at that cost. Each unit just costs $30. But one unit of production generates a negative externality that is equal to 20. Okay? So on the graph, this is the marginal cost for, we have a flat supply curve. Anyone, the suppliers are happy to supply infinite amount of goods at $30 per unit. For them, the private marginal cost is constant at 30. Okay? But there's a 20 units of 20, or let's say $20 externality. So for the society, collectively, we need to add the externality on the marginal cost to get the social marginal cost. That is 50. Okay? So the market equilibrium would be when the marginal cost equal to the demands, that's 70 units. But that's overproductions, because if you consider the social optimal, that's the social marginal cost. And on the demand side, there's no externality, so private marginal benefits is equal to the social marginal benefit. Okay? So the social optimal should be 50, where the social marginal benefits equal to social marginal cost. Right? So this is the social optimal, but if you just let the market do things, the outcome will be 70 units of productions and consumption. and that's way above the optimal. Okay? The solution would be, okay, just let's put a tax on productions. Okay? And the tax is equal exactly $20, which is the externality. So now, to produce each unit, the marginal cost for the producer increased by 20 because they need to pay the tax. And so it go back to here in the market equilibrium, which happened to be the socially optimal because you set the tax such that it equal to externality. And so again, this supply curve from the producer, it captured the social marginal cost again after you correct the market incentive for the suppliers so that it reflects not just the private marginal cost, but the social marginal cost. Okay? Now, in this case, things are simple. Right? Supply curve is constant. Right? Each unit costs $30, and it doesn't change as you produce more. In reality, we might have an upward sloping supply curve where there are people who can produce less costly, and there are people who can produce at a higher cost. So those people can only produce if the price is high enough. So we have an upward sloping supply curve. But even if we stick with a flat supply curve, we may have a situation where externality is not constant. It could be increasing, right? So for example, if the externality is such that when the production level is low, right? If you just produce tiny bit of fabric, you don't pollute the river that much, right? People can still more or less enjoy the river, or fishermen can still fish roughly the same amount of fish out of the river. But as you increase pollutions, as you increase productions, the externality for extra bit of pollution become bigger and bigger. So we will have upward sloping externality. The more you produce, the more externality you generate for each unit. And so you should impose a tax such that, again, you let the supply curve, again, reflect the social marginal cost. And that requires the government to intervene in a way to precisely know how the externality change as the production level change, such that it could cover pinpoints the tax schedule, such that now the supply curve will go back to here. Okay, in that case, it requires a lot of knowledge to estimate that, and that may or may not be feasible, or it could be a difficult task to do. Okay, and so that's sort of one limitations of corrected tax and subsidy. And so to wrap up, when there's externality, we could have market failure, and the government could intervene and mitigate it to make things better. But it's not an easy task to do. Okay? It requires certain knowledge in these markets. And then the question is to what extent the government could do a better job and deal with it. Okay?